everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. If you've been following along this season, you know that we've been doing a monthly interview series featuring various military spouses and family members. And with Memorial Day coming up, I wanted to take this opportunity to remember the life of someone who gave the ultimate sacrifice for this country. And today, my guest is Joe Kent. I've talked with Joe before, and his story has really stuck with me. And I'm grateful for the chance to introduce him to you all. Joe is a retired Army Special Forces Chief Warrant Officer who served for over 20 years and completed 11 combat deployments. Joe is someone who has not only lost a lot of his friends and comrades in the Middle East, but his wife, Navy Senior Chief Petty Officer Shannon Kent, was killed January 16th, 2019, while conducting special operations against ISIS in Syria. Shortly after her death, Joe moved back home to the Pacific Northwest, where he is raising the couple's two young sons, Colton and Joshua. And he's also currently running for Congress, which I'm sure we'll hear more about today. And Joe, I know between those two things with the boys and your congressional run, I'm sure you're such a busy man these days. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, I just described Shannon by her military title, but I'm sure you could brag on her all day for those accomplishments. And please do in this conversation. The floor is certainly yours to do so. But I just want to start by asking you, what was she like as a person? Just tell me about Shannon.
So Shannon was, I'd say, incredibly tenacious, and I think perpetual is the way I describe her, because she was just someone who crammed about 28 hours worth of activities into a 24-hour day somehow. I lived with her, I was married with her, and I still don't know how she quite did it. If I could bottle it and sell it, I'd probably be rich. She pretty much approached everything, I think, in her life with a sense of commitment and a sense of love. So she joined the military right after 9/11 because her father and her uncle were both first responders to 9/11. So she just felt incredibly called to go and serve, and to do her part, and to always be someone who stepped forward and take action. So that's kind of the theme of Shannon's life. She volunteered for pretty much every deployment she could to go forth and try and serve to her fullest capability and fullest capacity. She knew she had a knack for languages, so that's what put her into the military. And that spirit was very much alive in her the entire time I knew her. And then, especially when we first met, we were both in pretty high stress jobs in the military, and she did a really good job of balancing out our high stress jobs, but then also creating an awesome home life. I mean, just a peaceful and loving environment that I just didn't think went along with a military life. Because when I met her, I'd already been in for 15 years or so, and she had been in for a bit too. But she did a really good job of finding that balance and just kind of bringing some love and stability to my life, and then eventually into our children's lives.
How did you guys meet?
So we both ended up in a pretty unique unit that combines special operations people and intelligence folks to do a pretty unique mission for the country. So it's a fairly selective place, kind of hard to get into. Shannon and I had briefly met once before in 2007 in Baghdad, when she was giving an intelligence briefing to my special forces team about where some bad guys were that she had located. But that was like a 10-minute encounter. And then fast forward 6 years, we both end up in this relatively selective unit to get into, and we were in training together. So we just kind of hit it off from there, and the rest is kind of history.
How did you sort of maintain your relationship doing these like highly classified missions where you probably maybe couldn't talk about work a lot, or maybe you could because you were kind of doing them together, and then all the deployments and everything? How did you guys manage that?
So it really helped that we were both in similar lines of work, and we had both kind of been on this cycle of constant deployments, because we could relate to each other really well in a way that I don't think I could have related to somebody who wasn't in that world. And I think the same was true for her as well. But as far as how we balanced it out and we managed it, I mean, that was 90% Shannon, and I was 10% along for the ride. So she did a really good job, like I said, of creating this other life for us, like we were just normal people. And that was something at the 15-year mark of my deployment cycle and my career in the military, I didn't think was really possible. She just did a great job of, hey, we have our work lives, and that's cool, and we can talk about that, and it's neat that we can be honest with each other and supportive of each other, and we know what the other person's doing. We know down to the very finite detail, because we both did very similar things. That's fine, but there is a place where we're we're husband and wife, we're mothers and fathers, and we have a home life, and that's going to be something completely different. It's going to be a sanctuary from all this. And she did that really by like physically building the home while I was deployed, usually, and then just making every event very special, even if it was a non-event, even if it was just dinner at the end of the day, or something special we do with the kids, like going on a walk down by the river, or just all the little things. She just did a really good job of tying them into this very normal home life when we had very normal for us, but very abnormal jobs and kind of chosen paths in life.
Mhm. You told me that, last year when we talked, that after you retired, you went back to work for the government doing kind of the same type of work. And then after Shannon died, you left that life altogether and you moved back home. What has that transition been like for you? You're an Army veteran, you were used to a lot of action. And now you're home with the boys a lot. I don't know if that's changed since the last time we talked, but I'd be curious to just kind of hear about you and your current life and what that transition has been like.
So I never really intended on transitioning from the military lifestyle. So I retired from the Army at the 20-year mark, and then went right to work for the CIA. Pretty natural transition for guys in my line of work, and I was able to do that because of Shannon. I mean, she wasn't, I would say, enthusiastic, but she knew me well enough to know that that was what I wanted to do, and she supported me. Even though she was like, "Hey, it'd be better if you had something that wasn't necessarily so dangerous," but I get it. I understand why you want to do this. We had a plan mapped out that we'd both go when she retired and work kind of at an embassy type of setting overseas and raise our kids that way. Um, so she was very supportive of me, and that's why I was able to do that. And so therefore, I never planned on transitioning out of the lifestyle. I heard people talk about transition, and I just kind of thought that was something that I was never going to have to do. And that was up until she was killed. I, kind of had a moment of clarity despite all the grief that, hey, I could have gotten killed the same day she was. So I was on a very short deployment when she was killed. But I was out doing similar things that she was doing. So I, had this moment of clarity where it's like, hey, everything that I do now has to be about our children. It can't be that I have this job that has this, compelling and super important mission. I have to go put the kids first. So that's why it was hard, but easy at the same time. I personally, it was hard for me to leave that lifestyle, but at the same time, it was a pretty easy decision to make because I just realized the boys needed to come first. And so I moved back out here to the Northwest. Um, and, to say it was 100% easy, that'd be a lie, because there's all the grief and stuff that goes along with losing Shannon. And then just switching gears from being a guy who was not just gone a lot, but when I would go to work, it'd be, either just hanging out with guys that are pretty much like me, like-minded, and going and shooting and jumping on planes and doing all that fun stuff, to, to drop my kids off at school and going grocery shopping. I mean, I would do that stuff before too, because we tried to share the duties, but it's different when that becomes like your sole focus. So that's definitely been different to get used to say the very least. But I know if nothing else, if Shannon, um, the only thing that I think Shannon would really want me to do would be to focus on the kids and do the right thing by the kids. That would be her dying wish. So I mean, it makes it very clear to me that I'm doing the right thing.
How old are the boys now and what are they like?
So they're 3 and 5, and they are all boy all the time. So Colt, my oldest Colton, he looks like me, and then he kind of thinks and acts and talks like me. It's kind of funny to see the little mini me. So I kind of know what Colt's up to because we think the same. And then Joshy, who's 3, he'll be 4 next month. He looks like Shannon. He's got some characteristics that are similar to me. Looks like Shannon, but he's Shannon through and through. Like, he's almost too clever for his own good. He doesn't sleep that much, which is kind of challenging, but Shannon didn't sleep that much. So Joshy already has that at, age 3. Well, he's had that really since he was born. He's just not been a huge sleeper. But just a very inquisitive mind, and he's always kind of up to something, which was sort of Shannon's MO as well. So it's really cool to see her in both of them, in particular in Joshy. So yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I've seen pictures of the boys and your oldest has the curly hair and then
Mhm.
yeah. Um How do you talk to them about Shannon? How do you sort of keep her memory alive with the boys?
We try and talk about her as much as possible. I mean, we have her pictures up kind of everywhere, and then we sort of entwine, the nightly routine that we do, telling stories or reading books into Shannon, what Shannon did, try and bring back some of the memories, or at least implant the memory. So Colt has a really good memory, and so he actually asks me about times where him and Mama did this, or me and Mama said this, and I'm like, wow, I can't believe you actually remember that. So we try and keep those alive as much as we can. Unfortunately, Joshie was so young when she was killed. I don't think he's got any actual genuine memories, but he hears Colt and I talk about it enough that he's starting to form his own memories, his own picture of who his mom was. So talking about her and incorporating her into everything, especially like the night routines, say goodnight to mom. We have the pictures up kind of everywhere. And then especially as like Colt's in kindergarten now, so older he gets and figures out that there's career paths that people take. He asked me a bunch about the Army because we have Army stuff and Navy stuff about everywhere. So I also try and make a point of like, hey, mom went to war too. She was in the military as well, just to kind of put that in his head so he can kind of eventually understand why it was she had to go off and fight and ultimately pay the ultimate sacrifice for this country.
That was one thing that I remember you saying. It's like a lot of people want to talk about Shannon as a wife and a mother, but she was also this really accomplished uh, person in the military,
Yeah.
but she wasn't like a Navy SEAL or a Green Beret like you.
Yeah.
And so talk to me about that. Like, I know a big part of your mission since she died is to share her story. So talk to me kind of about how you're preserving that military legacy part of her as well.
Yeah, so a big a big thing when Shannon was alive, she had been in the military about 15 years when she was killed, and she was on her fifth combat deployment. She very much was a trailblazer in the modern military because she kind of got into special operations before there were women in special operations. I mean, going back to World War II, there was women that were in special operations, but it really didn't get codified until 5 or 6 years ago. And so Shannon and I'd say this very small cadre of females who were similar to Shannon, who sort of fought their way into SOF, but didn't have like a super formal role. They, I think, are some of the biggest unsung heroes of the global war on terror because they were there. They were taking the risks that we did. I mean, as Shannon's death highlighted tragically, I think a lot of Americans who weren't paying attention were like, why were there just two females killed alongside a Green Beret and a Navy SEAL? I mean, all the deaths are tragic, but I think America just became numb to seeing the pictures of guys that look like me coming home in caskets. And then people are like, oh my God, how did this woman end up over there? And then Shannon was killed alongside a Syrian American linguist as well. How were these two young women killed? And so I think that was kind of a wake up call. And in that tragedy, it's a chance to tell the story of folks whose legacy hasn't yet been told to the American people. So that's important to me, like big picture. And then also Shannon, while she was alive, she had to earn her way and fight her way into all these different elite organizations, but she never had the title, which she didn't really care that much about. But after being in for 15 years, she kind of got exhausted of always having to explain like, hey, I'm Shannon, I'm a crypto linguist, but I'm also trained in human intelligence, but I worked with the SEALs on every deployment I was on, and then I worked with these other special operations units. She's like, I always have to give this long dissertation on who I am and what I do and why I'm worthy of being here. She's like, you can just come into the room and say, hey, I'm Joe, I'm a Green Beret, and it's like over, and you've given up your credentials, for lack of a better term, uh, which I had never really thought about before. I'm like, yeah, you're right. And I would always try and tell Shannon that, hey, guys like me, we're kind of a dime a dozen. There's a bunch of us. But someone who can actually go in and learn Arabic at a level proficient enough to get intelligence from local speakers, to build rapport with local speakers, to build up those human networks that we need overseas. That's really unique. I mean, that's like the stuff that is not a dime a dozen and the stuff that we really, really needed and lacked in many cases in the global war on terror. So I would always try and tell her, like, you're way more elite than I actually am. If people could only know the full story. And she didn't believe me. She was like, all right, whatever. So in her death, it's very important to me to tell her legacy, so it's always a fine line. I love telling the human side because she was an amazing mother. She attempted to put our family first every step of the way. But she was also a warrior, when people rightfully, and I think just naturally sort of feel sorry that a woman lost her life over there compared to when a guy dies over there, it's a lot of like, thanks for your service, warrior, like till Valhalla, brother, and all that kind of macho stuff, just because we have however many thousands of years of men going off to war and dying, whereas women dying in combat is something new. So I understand it, but I do like to explain also that, hey, Shannon was just like all the other warriors that volunteered to go over and fight for their country.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Um, and a really heartbreaking piece of Shannon's story is that she was actually fighting to overturn a policy that had medically disqualified her from entering a Navy PhD program. That, of course, if she had been in that, she wouldn't have been in Syria. And I think it was because she had previously had cancer or something like that. Can you talk more about that? And I know that since her death, you've been advocating to change that policy. So, kind of talk more about that situation, and then where does that stand right now?
So, excuse me, let me, it's a very catch-22 story. So for people that aren't in the military, just the absurdity of bureaucracy sometimes, that there's these contradictory rules. So when Shannon was, after we had our second son, Shannon was like, hey, I don't want to be on this deployment cycle anymore because I want to be able to put the kids first, but I still feel a duty to my fellow service members. I want to do something that keeps me, consistent in the boys' lives, but it's still also contributing to the fight, because she felt, deeply called to serve the nation. So she had realized early on that there was a growing mental health crisis in the military. So when she was on her fourth deployment to Afghanistan I'm going to mess up the dates here, in 2012, 2013, their task force unit commander, who was an O5, fairly senior ranking guy, committed suicide on deployment. Tragically, the SEAL team had lost a couple of their SEALs and a couple of their other Army attachments in a couple IED strikes. This guy, probably due to how lonely being in command is, and due to the weight of all that, he tragically took his own life. And so Shannon was there then, and she was like, she could see that there was this growing crisis that we had, where veterans weren't talking about the issues that they were facing. It was a burden felt by the same people over and over and over again, because she was living that. She could feel it in herself, and then she could see it in her, in her fellow warriors as well. So she got a really keen interest in psychology. So she, in her spare time, like I said, Shannon found 28 hours in every day somehow. So she managed to finish her bachelor's, finish her master's, pass the GRE, and get into this doctoral program that the military has, where they basically take you from a regular enlisted person of whatever your job is, and they train you to become a psychologist. So it's actually a pretty good program, pretty robust program, very competitive to get into. So her GRE score, I don't remember what it had to be, but she studied her butt off for that thing. While she was pregnant with our second son, she had this massive thesaurus sized GRE book she was toting around. Just classic Shannon. But she passed it, got into this program academically, went and did great on the interviews. The psychology staff there was like, hey, you already have your master's in psychology. You've somehow managed to get this. You speak Arabic. We would love to have you as a part of this program. So she got accepted, got the acceptance letter that was going to put her on a trajectory where she was going to be in school for the next 4 years, becoming a psychiatrist. But then the Navy comes out of nowhere with this little regulation that says, technically you're ineligible to become a psychologist, because in the military, the doctors are all officers. So Shannon was an E7, so she was going to make the jump from enlisted to officer, which is very doable, happens all the time. However, when you go to from enlisted to officer, they hold you to accession standards. They hold you the same physical standards they would hold a 18-year-old coming off the street. And I don't mean physical, like how many push-ups can you do and how fast can you run. I mean, they give you a physical and they see if you have any dents and bruises in you that are going to be so significant that your military career could be cut short, because they're looking for a return on investment. So if you've had any form of cancer, they won't take you. They won't let you join the military. The logic being that you're going to then join the military and you're going to need all these expensive treatments. The military's have to pay for it. Shannon had gotten thyroid cancer cut out in 2016 while I was deployed. And she had been completely cancer free for over 2 years. I think she missed one day of work. She got the thing cut out. She sent me a picture laughing about it, and was back at work the next day. She made it a point after every pregnancy, and then after that surgery, to go and max out her physical fitness test. So she was technically deployable, but she wasn't eligible to commission as an officer. So what that breaks down to is she was physically capable of going and deploying on the front lines of Syria to go fight ISIS alongside special operators, but she wasn't physically fit enough by Navy standards to go sit in a classroom and learn how to become a doctor. So um, that hit her pretty hard. And she was like, this is a very messed up program. And if this happened to me, how many other people has this happened to? So she petitioned the Navy chain of command, eventually got permission to go start petitioning Congress. So Shannon did what Shannon did, and she just started calling everybody in. She started with New York State representatives because that's where she's from. They were actually pretty receptive and heard her out. So she went and made her case to her representatives from her district, and then to her two senators, Schumer and Gillibrand, as well, and said, hey, this is a huge issue that's affecting a lot of service members. Unfortunately, she didn't get a ton of traction. I mean, people were sympathetic, but they were kind of like, yeah, it's like a DOD issue. So Shannon ended up deploying, tragically losing her life, getting killed. So from there, we pointed out how absurd this regulation was. The Navy chain of command, Navy Chief of Operations, Admiral Moran, was very sympathetic and said, hey, we got this wrong. Let us do what we can to fix this regulation. So now there's multiple steps in how an enlisted person can go from enlisted to officer. It's all named after Shannon. So right now, the Navy has pretty much fixed everything that held Shannon back, and they've done so in her honor. So I'm very grateful that the Navy heard us out, because I know how slow the military can move. We're still trying to get the entire DoD to adopt the Navy's policy, but now that we have the Navy and the Marine Corps using that regulation standard, it's a 3-step process to reject a waiver. So you pretty much get preferred status treatment if you're enlisted and you're still technically deployable, if you're going to go commission. Whereas when Shannon went, it was like the opposite. It was like, you have to prove your case to us as to why we should accept you into this program because you have some dents on you. So we definitely made a lot of progress. I think that we're going to have to keep pushing. There's some guys that have contacted me that are in the Army that have had similar issues where they've been accepted into a commissioning program, and then the Army is like, no, you're technically not eligible because of, TBI or some other combat related injury. And it's like, hey man, the Army did this to these guys, and now you're holding them back from going into a career field that's probably physically less demanding. So there's still some work to be done there, but we've made some pretty good progress.
Well, now you're running for Congress in the midterm elections. Is that something that you have always wanted to do? Is that something that, part of this advocacy work kind of led to? I'd be curious, or is it just something that you're doing for yourself as part of the healing process? I'd be curious to know kind of how this all came about.
Well, it kind of came sort of out of nowhere. So after Shannon was killed, without getting too deep into the political weeds, she was killed about a month after Trump attempted to get our troops out of Syria the first time. So and after that, a bunch of folks in the administration kind of turned against Trump. There was this huge media war. I agreed to President Trump's policies at the time. I still do. I thought it was the right thing to try and get our troops out of Syria. So I despite all the grief that I was going through, I felt that it was necessary for me to say, hey, I've been doing this for 20 years. I had skin in the game. I lost my wife. I agree with what the president has to say. So I started advocating for Trump's foreign policy, in particular, getting us out of our endless wars in the Middle East. And that kind of showed me a different career. It's not really a career path, but a different calling of being able to go out and apply my knowledge that I gained in 20 years and my experiences to contribute to the national conversation regarding foreign policy. So I was going to go work in a second Trump administration in that role, probably on the National Security Council, had interviews and kind of got accepted for all that. And then 2020 went the way it did. And then just seeing, I don't think our country's in good shape right now. I think that there's a lot of division, a lot of strife. I think we're heading in a lot of bad directions. So I decided that, hey, I could sit here and I could complain about it for 4 more years and be like, well, I'm just going to complain. And, I know I'm good. I'm living in this place that's nice. And I know that my kids are well taken care of. Let the rest of the world burn. But I didn't want to do that. And really, at the end of the day, it comes down to the legacy for my 2 sons, probably in about 10 years or so, when they start to have more questions and they're wondering why they lost their mom so young, they're going to ask me why did mom get killed? Why did she go give her life in this country? And I think the state that we're in right now, I would have a hard time explaining to them that this is the country that their mom lost her life defending, just because we're so divided and there's so many, I think, just bad things going on right now. So I actually just wanted to go get back into a different fight, but get back into the fight and attempt to use my experiences and the way that I feel to actually make a difference here for this district that we live in.
The election is still a year away. So what are you kind of already doing? Or what do your days consist of as far as campaigning goes, I guess?
I mean, there's some days that are pretty busy, but right now it's fairly manageable because we're kind of far out. I'm trying to just get out to as many places in the district as we can. So my district is geographically very big and geographically diverse. So sometimes that requires a good deal of driving. But it's not so bad that I can't make it home every night to hang out with the kids. So it's very manageable. So doing lots of town halls, as much engagement as I possibly can in this COVID era. So also a lot of Zoom, which makes it easier to manage the kids, harder to make through connections of people. But really, it's just getting out and hearing from people and hearing what issues matter the most to them. So I think that's what people in the district really want. They actually want to feel like their elected representatives understand who they are, where they're coming from, and that they'll actually listen to them.
Joe, have you found any sort of community in the military, like among Gold Star spouses? I know they're mostly women, but I was curious if you've been able to connect with them or other male widowers or found another type of support group to kind of get you through the last 2 years.
Relying heavily on family has been kind of my main support group. All my former teammates have all been extremely supportive and all that. The Gold Star community is awesome. I mean, there's just seeing how incredibly strong the Gold Star mothers in general, mothers and wives, that's the most prominent. But I've also connected with a lot of Gold Star fathers. There's only a handful of us Gold Star husbands, and I actually have not connected with any of the other Gold Star husbands. I think there's only like two or three of us that I know of that are from the GWAT era. But the Gold Star fathers have been a pretty awesome network. Also, just working on the advocacy for some of the Gold Star programs, I found rewarding because I had a unique experience, being 20 years in the military, and then also losing Shannon, and so there were some systemic bureaucratic issues I found in the Gold Star process that I was like, hey, we have to have a better answer for this. Like if I'm having a hard time navigating the DoD system, and I was in the DoD system for 20 years, like I can't imagine like your average Gold Star spouse is a young woman who is, I think the median age is like 24 or 25 when they average it all out. So I'm like, you're expecting some young lady who's probably got two kids at home, to figure all this stuff out, and I couldn't figure it out. So I connected with some of the people that worked in the Pentagon in that area. So Jane Horton was a widow herself, Gold Star spouse. She lost her husband in 2011 in Afghanistan, and then from there she became a full-time advocate for Gold Star families. So much to the point that when Trump came into office, he gave her a full-time appointee position at the Pentagon where she would advocate for Gold Star folks. So she really was kind of my gateway into getting regulations changed. And then she, told me to write down all my experiences throughout the casualty notification process. And we were actually able to go in and make some changes and get a Gold Star task force made in the Pentagon, so that the services actually have to go and hear from Gold Star spouses to identify a lot of the specific administrative issues that Gold Star families face. So yeah, so the Gold Star community has been great, and it's always, you always have, even if you've never met the person before, like you have that tragedy in common.
Yeah. Well, Joe, this conversation has been really great. I've enjoyed it and enjoyed getting to know more about Shannon. Is there anything else that you want to say about her or about your life as we kind of wrap up here?
She was just an amazing person. I could tell stories, all day long. So she's got a long legacy that's, both someone who went forward and fought for this country, but then also someone who built an amazing life and was an amazing caring mother and did everything. Everything in her life was geared toward, was done with love in her heart and through a sense of service to her family and service to her country.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.